Again, Gills fans, welcome back to the latest episode of Gills in the Blood TV. As you can see, I'm joined by two familiar faces, Reece and Jack, or as he wants to be known now, 40-yarder Reece, after his goal at the Priestfield last weekend. And Jack apparently wants to go by the name Hit the Post Jack after a recent charity game. Won't talk about me. Centre halves never get any of the glory. But it means one thing. Us three together equals Gills in the Pub, episode 8. Gents, I think the last time we spoke was early February and things were just starting to turn. I think it had been 7 points from 9 when we last got together. That would have been Colchester, Hartlepool and Swindon, but obviously there was still plenty to do. But we sit here now, 10th of May, season's finished. We ended up closer to 12th than we did to the bottom two, which is quite frankly staggering. Yeah, when we last recorded, we were 16 points away from the middle of the table. And yeah, we ended up 3 points off the middle of the table. So plenty to get into in this episode. We'll start with a review of the second half of the campaign. I think that seems the natural place to get going. I'll come to you first, Reece. Second half of the campaign's been frankly ridiculous, hasn't it? I don't think anyone saw such a turnaround, despite the optimism when we last got together.
No, definitely not. And obviously, like you say, we picked up a couple of results the last time we recorded. But at that point, the priority was still just survival. We'd have taken 22nd place at the time. But yeah, I had a look. I think the game before we did the last episode was Crawley. And I think we've played 19 since then. So yeah, the last 20 games, we've been top 6. I see just before we come on that in 2023, we were second highest for points. So yeah, most important thing, like I say, was that we stayed up, but we did that and then some in the end. I think we stayed up by 12 points in the end, something ridiculous. No, we could never have seen that coming at like the turn of the year. And it's not just the fact that we stayed up as well. We ticked a lot of boxes along the way. We've proven that we can compete with teams at the top end, ready to go into next season. Obviously, we beat Salford on that last day. We beat Orient and Carlisle at home. We've drawn to Stockport. We've drawn at Bradford. And what was important that once we got safe, it was important that I think that the team and Harris left fans wanting more when the season finished and continued that optimism over the summer. And I certainly think they've done that.
Yeah, I'll come to you now, Jack, because obviously the last home game was Newport, and we all know that generally last season aside, there's a lap of honour at the end, regardless of the result. But it all fell a bit flat, didn't it? Which was very typical Gills. Just one of them games where we just didn't get going. It's been a long season. I'd imagine the players were fatigued mentally and physically after going through the first half of the campaign. And yeah, it was just Newport played the role of party poopers really well. So it was great to go to Salford 8 days later, or whatever it was, in the end after late changes because of the King's coronation, and pick up a very good 3 points, which, based on where they were and where they finished and the fact that our away form's still not been brilliant since the turnaround as well, was probably automatically puts that into top 3 performances of the season, surely.
Yeah, no, it was definitely up there. So it's a good result considering that they needed to win the game. I think it's been kind of sanctimonious of the second half of the season, really. I know the away form's not been great, and that's something that I was going to mention later on. The fact that it's not been amazing, which we do need to work on. If we get that right, we're going up, I think, personally, if we carry on the way we've been going. But it was a very good result. I think we can forgive the Newport game. The thing I was actually more disappointed about in the Newport game is that the Nichols header got ruled out because of the bet that we all talk about. But
4 minutes, Gills fans. He took 4 minutes to start talking about Tom Nichols.
The Gills bingo, the Jack bingo. There's one more to come later, isn't there? Yeah, but anyway, very good end to the season. In great second half of the season. What can we say, really? It's been amazing. As poor as the first half of the season was, I don't think anybody in January, even in January, could have predicted we'd finish 17th. To be honest, which there's a lot of people that are sitting there, and I get it, saying it's not a great season. Well, of course it isn't. None of us would have wanted 17th at the start of the season, but to put it in perspective, we'd have definitely taken that at the start of January. So I don't think we can do anything other than commend the boys for the second half of the season and the last game of the season.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think any of us three are sitting here and saying it's been a good campaign. And I don't think Neil Harris has done. I've watched his press conference after the Salford game. Had to do it in a car park because Salford were doing a lap of honour. But yeah, he's come out, and I think one of the journalists even said, "How would you rate the season?" And he said 0.5 for the first half of the campaign. And he said that's because I picked 11 people and they went out on the pitch and they tied their shoelaces up. So I think that's probably a bit harsh. I think, but the cup run certainly saved
Maybe
it.
a one.
An absolute complete abomination of a 6 months or whatever it was. But yeah, I think, like we always say, if you're going to sit here and criticise the first 4 months of the season, then you've got to automatically sit here and give high praise for the turnaround since the middle of January. And Reece mentioned it was 19 games since we last spoke. 9 wins, 4 draws, and 6 defeats in that time. 21 goals, 4 and 18 against. So it's less than a goal a game we're conceding. We'll get on to what we want for next season in terms of goal scores and threats. And I think 21 in 19 still not good enough if we want to be in the top 3. But yeah, 31 points from them 19 games at 1.63 per game puts you in the playoff zone. And as we've already alluded to, the form in 2023 has a second in the entire division. So yeah, kudos to Neil Harris and Dave Livermore and Kenny and Hess and all the players and Paul Fisher and the chairman, and dare I say it. But it's a team effort, and they've done really well to change it around. I do apologise if the internet drops out a little bit. We're in the middle of a thunderstorm where I'm living at the moment. So yeah, no complaints.
Funny enough, it actually dropped out when you said Mr. Scally. Funny enough, it went completely mute.
I thought that was deliberate.
Scally, but yeah, that was a
perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Yeah,
thunderclap. Yeah, it's quite frankly, it's just been absolutely ridiculous. Like Jack and Reece have both said, we didn't see it coming. I know we said we'd have taken 17th on the 14th of January. We'd have probably taken 22nd and not entirely believe that we could have got there, because it was 6 points was the gap to safety when this all started. To have got that far clear is testament to absolutely everybody. Does bring us on to one man, and I know Jack on the last couple of episodes has had a slightly different view to myself and Reece. I think me and Reece were thinking along the same lines of, if you back him properly, he will succeed. Jack was, and quite understandably so. And I don't think Reece or me would have disagreed if the axe had been wielded. That's Neil Harris. Reece, you mentioned ticking boxes throughout the second half of the season. I've written in my notes, January to February was beat teams around us. We went and beat Hartlepool 2-0. We went to Colchester and won 2-0. Beat Crawley, beat Rochdale, drew 0-0 with Harrogate. Didn't concede a goal against them 5 teams, which is a really good effort as well, which means you're not losing football matches if you can't win them. I think it's then fair to say that the next step, February to March, was to start beating teams in and around the mid-table area. We beat the likes of Grimsby, albeit that game's in hand at the time. We beat Wimbledon, we beat Tranmere comfortably. The one thing that was missing was, could we start beating the top sides? And Jack, we've done that in the last 6 weeks of the season, haven't we? I've written down since mid-March, we've gone to Stockport and drawn 0-0. We've beaten Carlisle at home 1-0. It was a couple of minutes away from beating Stockport at home, ended up 1 each. Beaten Leyton Orient, albeit against 10 men for a long time, but that's not our fault. You can only beat what's in front of you. Went to Bradford and drew 2-2, and then beat Salford away on the last day of the season. The only defeat against the top sides in that period was Northampton Town, and that was an absolute screamer. Has Neil Harris, for you now, Jack, convinced you that he deserves to stay for the summer and at least the first third of the season?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my opinion was based on the first half of the season, and until sort of November time, I was of the opinion that it was broadly all on Scally's shoulders. The fact that we'd only scored 7 goals by January, to me, made me feel that he was part of the problem, and I didn't have the confidence in him that he would actually be able to turn it around. I felt like he was a busted flush. I felt like that he was, and he said it in interviews, to be fair, that he was mentally on his arse as well, for want of a better way of putting it. So to go from where we've been to now is phenomenal. There's no doubt in my mind he deserves next season. You know, I'd probably say at Christmas, if we're not near the top 7, he might be in trouble. And when I say not near the top 7, I'm talking lower half of the table, not sort of 10th. Even then, that would probably be wouldn't be amazing. But no, there's still, and we maybe talk about this now. We'll come on to it, but there's elements of things that he does that, in terms of how he plays football, that I don't believe is necessarily the right way. But we're a League Two team, and ultimately he's done everything you could have asked, of him and more in the second half of the season. And to be 6 adrift, I think it was, and to be 12 clear is a phenomenal effort. And anyone remotely calling for his name, I don't understand in the slightest. I understand not necessarily liking his football, because I'm probably in that camp, but you cannot argue with that second half of the season. You cannot argue with fact.
This is it, and this is the thing that frustrates me. There's a difference between form and there's a difference between style of play, and I think some fans get muddled up with the two. They cross over. There's not a crossover. Form is fact, regardless of whether you play long ball, tippy-tappy, whether you score a 40-yard screamer or it goes in off the centre-half's arse on the line. If you win 1-0, you get 3 points. That is form, regardless of how you get them 3 points. Reece, I want to come to you about the style of football. And one point I want to make as well, which I think makes this turnaround even more impressive, is the fact that there was no sort of benefit of any type of pre-season. These players that came in, and we're talking the likes of, I'm excluding Glenn Morris because he was here for the first half, but Connor Masterson, Tim Dieng, George Lapsley, Ollie Hawkins, Tom Nichols, Aidan O'Brien to an extent, they're the ones that have come in and formed the spine of being around the starting 11, and they've had to just come in and hit the ground running. There was no other option back in January. How much more impressive does that make the turnaround, the fact that there was no benefit of pre-season, and also how exciting does that make the 23-24 campaign, because we'll have the benefit of a whole summer of these players being together on the training pitch, plus whatever else we bring in.
Yeah, it speaks volumes about the work that's been done, because while sort of back when we last recorded and we'd only just started to turn the corner, even during sort of the dark period, I always felt that while the takeover talks were going, I thought if we got it over the line, Harris would be the right man. I was always confident we'd survive under Harris, but even I didn't think that we would start picking up results as quickly as we did, because let's be honest, it was overnight. We started winning games overnight. We went from a team that couldn't score to a team that beat Hartlepool 2-0.
I think we said at Swindon, didn't
2-0.
we? Sorry to interject. We said at Swindon, we've scored the same amount of goals in literally 270 minutes, or less than that, because it wasn't even the full game at Swindon. So it was effectively, it was the same amount of goals in about 195 minutes than we'd scored in 23 league matches. It was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think as well, obviously Jack's touched on as well, that sort of back sort of when we was really struggling, and people rightly so, because the results were poor, they doubt him, think he's sort of his busted flush and things like that. But I think it's also important to remember that I don't think a rough period should necessarily define a manager. Let's be honest, apart from Pep, who hasn't been sacked, who hasn't had a rough period in their managerial career, does that mean that one bad period makes everyone a bad manager? I don't think it does. And, the three of us as well, funnily enough, over the last couple of days, we've listened back to previous episodes. And actually, when we look back to before this season started, we all sort of had reservations about where we were going to be. And whilst, on the face of it, 17th isn't a good season, we all sort of signalled that we wouldn't have been massively surprised if that had ended up happening. So we've gone a little bit full circle to get there. But in the end, we've ended up about where I thought we would be this season. But I'm just really glad that Harris has turned it round, because he was really good with his time with me and a couple of others at the end of year awards as well, which we'll come on to later. He's a genuinely good bloke, and I think both sides of the coin need a lot of credit here. Both him, because when we went down from League One, he could have easily have thought League Two isn't for him, and he could have walked away then, and then could have walked away when this season started badly, and he stayed loyal to us. And so whoever's been making the decisions at Gills, obviously whether that's Scally and Fisher to start with, and then Brad and Shannon as they come in, to trust Neil and stay loyal to him, when I still believe that 98 times out of 100 of the clubs in that situation, the manager gets sacked. They back Neil. They trusted the courage of their convictions that he's the man, and the squad quality was the issue. And in the end, all the decisions have been right. It's turned out to be the right decision. And now we've seen in the second half of the season elements of what reflects Neil Harris's CV prior to coming to us. He builds teams that can compete with at the top end of leagues, for them playoff positions. And what we've seen, that once we've got the club functioning properly and we've got a competitive team on the pitch, we've seen a reflection of that in Harris's management of us.
Yeah, I'd
Jack, I'm
agree
going to
with
come
that.
back to you now. And Reece has made a point about staying loyal when we got relegated. He could have walked away, and there was all this talk, wasn't there, when he signed the contract? Was there a release clause if we got relegated? Because we've said it on every episode, I think that he was essentially writing a relegation onto his CV. We got a lot closer than we should have done. Question to you, Jack, is now, despite going through all the rubbish that we've had to get to this point, are we almost now looking forward with such optimism that relegation was almost a blessing in disguise? Because if we'd had that budget in League One, we'd probably be 6 months behind because I think we'd have got relegated out of League One this season if we'd not had the relegation into League Two. To the point where I don't think even a takeover would have saved us at Christmas if he was in League One. The fact that there was only 2 teams go down helped us out massively in this division. I think if we was in League One throughout the last campaign with that squad, it could have been even more embarrassing than it was. And I think we'd have been too far adrift with four going down.
I'd probably say no, mate, because I think in the last episode I did say, look, people look on relegation too fondly. You know, it's imagine getting the Gallantsons. I know you're saying we might have had a poor second half of the season, but if we're in League One with the Gallantsons, then we're already a year or two ahead of the project of where we are now. So I'd have to disagree there, mate. I think personally, but I think to sort of harass the point about being a good bloke, I have to agree with that. I know he had a few run-ins with certain fans, but. And he didn't come and clap us at some away games, despite what he says. He's got a good bond with the fans now. I think. Do you know what? It's a bit of a random thought, but what he does with the fans at the end of games might be staged. It might be to curry favour with us, but it's working. I would say, and also I think maybe subconsciously some of the players actually enjoy it, which pushes them on more to win a game to see that at the end. So it's good to see the fist pump at the end to the fans. Unfortunately, it is the only pump at the club still, as we don't have the self-service pumps. We've got it in, but
Oh, good.
But but no, I think the relationship with the fans has got a lot better. It's a byproduct of winning football matches at the end of the day. But I feel like the club is pulling in the right direction. There are a few alone voices that are still suggesting he should go, and I think there's an element of that is people not kind of swallowing their egos and admitting they were wrong, which is where I'm sat. I was wrong about him. He's very lucky we got a takeover. He would have been gone, I think, without it. But the fact is, we did have a takeover, so there's no point looking back. As Scally used to say, let's look forward. We've got the right man for the job. I think there are some flaws which I can talk about, but look, his CV, as Reece says, is very good for us. And when we hired him, I think all of us felt that it was at the top end of what we could have expected we hired at the time. And bar the start of last season, he generally has had a good spell with the club. I know he's got us relegated, sort of, mainly Evans, but ultimately that second half of the season was decent, and the second half of this one was decent. He just needs to get a good first half of the season put together.
Yeah, and I'll come back to you, Reece, and the point that you made about, one poor period doesn't make a poor manager, and there's one former manager of ours that's just been promoted out of this division. So again, that carries favour with that theory. Steve Evans, I'm talking about, of course, has got Stevenage promoted automatically. Forgot what I was going to say. I wanted to ask you the similar question to Jack. That was it. Sorry, yeah, about the blessing in disguise of maybe being down. My point was being that I think if we was in League One this season, I think we'd have been so far adrift in the first half of the campaign with that squad that even a takeover wouldn't have been able to save us from relegation. So I just think in terms of the mood around the camp now, I know Jack said we'd be ahead of the game and ahead of the 8 ball because the Gallantsons would be here. But I still think we'd have suffered a relegation into this division and then had to start again in League Two. I don't know what your thoughts are on it. Blessing in disguise or not?
I can see both sides of the argument, because I suppose to back up your point, Matt, what you could also argue is that did us dropping into League Two and starting this season so badly actually speed up the takeover process? Because it maybe did shake Scally into thinking, I really can't do this anymore. We need help. Whereas if we'd have still been sitting in League One, playing against decent teams, Sheffield Wednesday, Portsmouth, Charlton, maybe the thought, well, if we go down to League Two, so be it. But did suddenly that serious threat of the National League all of a sudden open his eyes and think,
good point.
I need to get this solved?
Yeah, that is a really good point, yeah.
Yeah, probably did actually. Actually, when you think about it, so it's a good, very good point.
But also, obviously, we just mentioned Evans. Think I see a tweet the other day, which did surprise me, given that Evans got us 10th twice, but Harris now has a better win percentage than him and Lovell.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I'd forgotten, and I had to freestyle it. Yeah, Hayden Parry.
That's mental, really, that, isn't it? That's crazy. It's the second half of this season, isn't it? That's done it.
Well, I'm trying to think. If we break it down into sections, what did he have? He had 18 games in League One, and we won 5. So you're looking at around 32%. I'm no mathematician, but then obviously the first half of this season was 2 in 23. So that's, we just won't talk about that. But he's going along at, was it 12 wins in half a season? So yeah, over 50% has hugely boosted it.
Well, I think ultimately he's not managed as many games as the other two, though, has he? That's where the barometer is going to be. But I think
you've probably got to look at it at the end of next season, or at least at Christmas, maybe, to see. But I'd be quite hopeful now that it's going to keep going on an upward trajectory.
I think for me, mate, just with Harris, I don't want to labour the point, especially not in a negative way too much about him. And you guys know how I feel at certain points about him. But I think, I've as I've pointed out before, my cousin's a Millwall fan, and he absolutely loves the bloke as a player. And his opinion, which kind of backs up my own thinking, is that in games where a plan B is needed, I always feel that he doesn't necessarily have it in his back pocket. And we're quite a direct team and we don't really mix it up. We kind of have towards the end of the season. I'll give him some due. But I think for me, that's probably a byproduct of the squad he had and the budget he had. And it has got better since Christmas. But that's why I feel it was partly his fault before Christmas. And I still feel during games, maybe next season, there might be times where, look, I don't care if we win every single game 1-0. We scored 49 goals under Pulis and got promoted. I just feel at times he goes a little bit too defensive, trying to see games out, and we concede, which, as you guys have pointed out, isn't necessarily his fault. He's not on the pitch at the end of the day. But I think an exceptionally good manager will win points, whereas I feel like we actually lost points this season, even with the better players, because of him. So that is my concern for next season. It will come out in the wash. Let's see where we are. But if the guy ends up losing his job, which let's hope he doesn't, but let's say it comes to Christmas, we're nowhere near the playoffs, I think we'll look back on it and those will be some of the reasons why, potentially. But let's hope that doesn't happen.
No, of course, yeah. And we've had this chat plenty of times in our group chat. And again, it always seems to be me and Reece that have the similar sort of thought process. But yeah, and I think me and Reece have said that if he was doing it with half hour to play, you could become frustrated. But games like Stockport, I think 9 out of 10 managers chuck on a centre half with 5-10 minutes to go to try and see out a game when you're 1-0 up against a team like that. Again, we can see both sides of the coin. It is frustrating. But I guess to a degree, though, Harris is in a no-win situation. Chucks on a centre half and we concede. He's too defensive. If he chucks on another centre forward and tries to get a second and we concede, why is he taking a risk? Why is he not shut up shop? So it's...
I get it, mate. I think it's the fact it's happened quite a few times. That's the reason it's made me have that opinion. But
no, of course, I totally understand that.
Let's see where we are next season, because ultimately I think we're going to have better players anyway. So I don't think that's going to be an issue for him. But I think that's where maybe an exceptionally good manager for this level is shown versus one that's very good. Maybe, I don't know. I'm probably being a bit harsh on the bloke.
Well, especially after possibly the Newport game the other week is probably a good example as well, because he actually made a lot of very attacking changes in the second half of that game, and it was quite possibly our worst second half at home all season in the second half of the season. And whilst there may be one or two games, like you can argue Stockport, maybe his changes did cost us points. I think even if they are defensive changes, I think they've done the job more often than not. Because I think it might have been in our chat that I said at one point that ultimately, if you take our home form in the second half of the season, could you confidently say that if he played a different brand of football, we'd have taken more points than we have at home? I'd be very surprised if anyone could argue a case that we would have done.
No, and I think we said this, didn't we? Yeah. You shut up shop against, if you look at the results, all right, Hartlepool, we were 2-0 up. You shut up shop against Crawley at 1-0, saw it out. Grimsby at 2-1. We got pegged back, we went and won it. Wimbledon, he shut up shop, I think, last 10 minutes at 2-1 up. We saw it out. Tranmere, we saw it out comfortably. Crewe, we saw it out and 1-2-1. Carlisle, I'm not going to say because the goal came so late that it made no difference. Doncaster, we had to see out and we did it fairly well. So, yeah, I mean, we can see both sides of the argument. I'm just going to get the team up for that Newport game, though, because Reece mentioned it and it's just made me have a look. Changes that day, were Hawkins and Clark that came on. So, yeah, 2 attacking changes and But again, I think it almost looked like a game too far at the time for me, and it was just the season catching up with absolutely everybody. But the ultimate thing to say now, I think, is Neil Harris won't have excuses for 23-24, will he? He's got a budget. He will be backed. He'll get the players he wants. I don't think we're being list C and D. I think we're being A and B at worst. So with that, raises expectations naturally, which is exciting. But obviously, it puts more pressure on the gaffer. And I think I hope, like you said, Jack, and I think Reece will agree. I think it's pressure that he'll thrive with. And I think we'll continue to grow. I'm not going to sit here and say we're going to win the league. I think there's a certain couple of Americans, or an American and a Canadian at least, that think they're going to turn up and steamroller this division. Right, that's the season done. That's Neil Harris. Let's have a look at some slightly off the pitch stuff. Mid-April, club statement came out, and I think we was all a bit surprised because no one really knew what was going on. We weren't wanting a manager sacked. We didn't want the chairman incumbent to be selling up. It was Paul Fisher leaving with immediate effect, which I think took everyone by surprise. Noises coming out of the club that it's all very sort of amicable, and Fisher's got to look after his own business and that type of thing. I'll come to you, Jack, first. No, actually, I'm going to read a quote first. Sorry, and this was from Neil Harris on The Man, and he said recently in Kent Online, "What I will say is a huge thanks from me personally to Fish, because he kept me sane during the first half of the season. He's a class act, both in business and in person." Just how big an impact, Jack, did Paul Fisher have on this football club in probably one of the most testing periods of the last 10 to 15 years? Not by doing massive things, spending loads of money, but just by subtly making little changes here and there to make our experience better. And then, which meant that even if we weren't winning football matches, there was over time, I'm not saying instantly when he arrived in August, but people actually wanted to come to the football club for the social side of a match day as well.
I don't think there's an adequate adjective really to probably describe the impact he had. Really, it's the club was dying a death really before he came in, and you do have to praise Scally for the fact he brought him in. Probably a bit of a PR exercise, because if Scally had remained at the start of last season, well, actually, to be fair, we couldn't have done much worse than where we were in the end, could we? But like you say, the subtle little things, bringing things back to the matchday experience, were good. But for me, he ultimately got the club pulling in the right direction. And once the takeover was done, which he's helped engineer in 4 months, which is something we've been looking for supposedly since about 2006-07. So either we weren't looking hard enough before, or Fisher's just a much better person at doing that than Scally was in terms of finding a buyer. When you look back on his influence, in terms of a conduit between the owner, be it Scally or the Gallansons, he's been phenomenal, really, because he supports the club. He's got the club's best interests at heart, and it meant that a lot of people gave him a lot of leeway. Not that he needed it. He never did anything to need leeway, but it's a bit of a strange one, him going, and I think inevitably it will mean the club isn't quite so in touch with the fans, because I think there's talk that a combo of Joe Comper and Kelly Derham are kind of doing the kind of operations and commercial stuff together, and as good as they seem to be at their job, they aren't Paul Fisher, with respect to them. So I think it ultimately he's a bit of a unique person in that role. Really, I don't think you'll ever find someone, unless they're a Gillingham fan who's worked for the club before like him, you won't find someone like him that will be that sort of conduit. So it's going to be a loss for the club, definitely.
Yeah, I'll see what you're saying. Obviously, we know that Joe and Kelly are both very good at what they do, but they're both Crawley fans at the end of the day. So they could have been working for WAGME. But yes, I understand what you're saying, and I think Paul Fisher was good at getting the balance right in terms of being a fan and being a business person as well. And I'll come to you now, Reece. Like Jack mentioned, there were little things like improvements in the factory, just putting things like burgers and hot dogs and bacon rolls in there on a match day, getting a club legend in to go and do a QA at half one was enticing people to the club. Still no self-service pumps. Better communication, just in general, in terms of he tweeted stuff that he wanted us to know without going into too much detail of stuff that we shouldn't be knowing. The specifics of a match day, like the schedule, the itinerary. And then I think, of course, the big one was the factory floor opening, which is a massive improvement on what it's been for years. It's a place that you want to go and stand. You can have a beer, you can have a pie, you can have meatballs now. There's more food offerings, and you can watch the football, which is essentially what we're all there to do. So you can watch the early game. What's your overriding thought on Paul Fisher and what he did in essentially a very short space of time? And this is without taking into the fact that, like Jack said, he helped find the Gallinsons, which is ultimately the biggest thing he could have ever done for us.
Yeah, and Jack was spot on when, you know, he was brought in to try and make the club sellable. And he did it in an incredibly short space of time in comparison to what we'd been led to believe the club had been trying to look for 15, 20 years. In terms, before I come on to the fans' point, obviously, you touched on Matt Harris's comments about him. Whether it is gospel, whether it's absolute truth, I don't know. But I did hear murmurs a couple of times that there was a home game in particular. I can't remember what one, where Harris was ready to jack it in. And apparently it was Fish that had to sit down with him and convince him to stay. And obviously, in the end, we get to the end of the season, results have gone out as they are. And because I'm biased towards him, and I do still believe that Harris is one of the club's best assets. So Fisher deserves a lot of credit for making sure that he kept Harris sane. If in Neil's words, that's what he did. And from a fan's point of view, yeah, sort of in the build up to the takeover and even post takeover, you know, we've seen sort of crowds of 7,500 at Priestfield, and he deserves a lot of credit because I think he did a lot of the groundwork for making that happen for reasons you've mentioned. But for me, the best quality of Paul Fisher is humility. We all know that he's been crucial in turning our fortunes around, but he likes to play it down. He likes to give everyone else the credit. And he doesn't like to steal the limelight, unlike someone else on the microphone at the end of season awards the other week.
Yeah. I think, do you know what? Little things again, just thinking about it, you know, factory, for instance, you know, I would say 99 times out of 100 for the last 4 or 5 years, I've wanted to go Cricks instead of factory before a game because you got served quicker, better atmosphere. And I didn't really want to give my money over to Scally, if I'm brutally honest. But now the whole vibe in the factory is better. You get served quicker. So even little things like that he's directly influenced people spending more money with the club ultimately, which can only be of benefit.
Absolutely. We've had the sportsman's dinners as well, I think, which have been a real success as well. There's been a couple. I didn't go to the second one. That was Glenn Hoddle, but I think was we all at the first one, the Tony Cascarino one?
I didn't go to that one, mate.
I didn't go. No.
Oh, it was just me then. Fair enough. That was really good. You should have come. It was decent, to be fair. But again, it's other stuff. And we understand, and we've said this before, that it's not like the 90s when Paul Scally took over. You have to have multiple avenue streams now to be a successful football club. But I think what Paul Fisher did was clever in getting money into the club as a general, but also making sure that the football side of things was looked after really quickly.
Yeah, definitely. It can't really put it into words properly how well he's done for the club.
No, I don't. Like you say, legend is a word that gets chucked around too often, too easily, I think. But I'm inclined to go down that route with him because I think without him and obviously him having a part in the process of getting Brad and Shannon in, we'd probably be a non-league football club sitting here having this conversation. So,
yeah, which would be disastrous. So, and you look back on Scally saving us, but ultimately we were at the start of a season, which we went up from, which was an amazing season. But the influence on this season is probably more so than when Scally took over. Well, that's a bit of nonsense, really, because we were going to go out of business if Scally didn't buy us, wasn't we, actually? So forget what I've just said there. But it was, we were going down to the non-league, weren't we? We were going into the National League if we didn't get taken over. So kudos to him for finding it very quickly.
Absolutely, yeah. And you just wonder if Paul Scally found these people, but perhaps Mr. Fisher was more approachable and easier to liaise with. But who cares? It's all done now. And yeah, we won't talk about the other Paul. End of season awards, gents. That was a good night. I think I've still got alcohol in my system nearly 2 weeks later. We all had a great time.
So did Alex McDonald.
Alex McDonald had a better time than others, but we won't repeat some of the stuff.
No, but he was a bit drunk, wasn't he? Bloody hell.
A little bit drunk. Yeah, he's only a little fella, bless him. But yeah, he certainly put it away. So was Max Ehmer, to be fair. and Jake
It's a
Turner.
good night.
Both
Very good night.
Full on Rambos with the ties around the heads quite early in the evening. Just want to run through the awards, quick chat, whether we agree, disagree. I don't think there's going to be too much disagreement, but we'll go with not the minor awards, but we'll start with Young Player of the Year went to Dom Jeffries. Number one, I don't think there was any other people that were really in contention, to be fair, but I thought Dom was a very worthy winner. He's had a very good first season in the pro game. We know he missed a large chunk at the early portion of the season because he decided not to tell Neil Harris that he'd pulled a quad in the warm-up on opening day and decided to play on it for 45 minutes, and we didn't see him for 2 months after that. But I think from around November, even in the dark days, Reece, he was probably one of our best players in the run-up to Christmas and the New Year.
Yeah, and he was what he was, and possibly still is, even with the current setup. He's one of few players that gives us sort of that drive, real energy, can carry us up the pitch easily. Which, you know, because we are a team which doesn't have a lot of pace in it at the moment. He's had some really crucial qualities, but like you say, that we didn't have a whole host of competition to go against him, but that doesn't make him any less deserving of it, because
No.
he's, like you say, for his first season in the pro game, he's been really, really good, and you know, it's good signs for us for what's to come for him in the future.
I have to say, actually, and probably Morris is the person that takes this accolade over him. But if you had to say who over the course of both halves of the season, although he missed the first 2 months, actually was our best player, is probably Morris first, isn't it? And then probably Jeffrey second. So for me, I think he was actually in contention for Player of the Year, if I'm honest. So him getting Young Player of the Year was an absolute no-brainer, really. And he's got, I said this on the episode before the season started, and it's played out that way, I think, that he's got Hessenthaler vibes about him. He's a box-to-box player, doesn't mind a tackle, he's got lots of energy, he can play a pass, he can score a goal. I think he'll play a lot higher than us in time, unless we go up.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's how quickly we progress. Can we progress at the same rate that he potentially could progress? I think he's under contract for another year, which is great to see, because I'd imagine there's probably been a few clubs sniffing around based on what they've seen over the last 6 months. I'd personally add Max Ehmer into that list of yours as well, Jack, in terms of people that were decent throughout the whole campaign. I think we're looking at mistakes from Max that ultimately cost us goals. I think it's 2, which is Bradford at home and Dagenham just before Christmas in the FA Cup, just after ironically scored to put us in front. But I'm a big Max Ehmer fan, and I don't make any bones about that. I know he has his flaws, but what player at this level doesn't? Goal of the season wasn't
a screamer,
wasn't
was
a
it?
classic list.
Not many to pick from.
No, there wasn't loads. Yeah,
There you
Reece
go.
unfortunately scored his goal 2 weeks too late. I know Mackel was in the Gents Player of the Year moaning that his free kick against Leyton Orient had come too late to be shortlisted as well. But it went to Charles Alexander. I'd probably inclined to agree out of the selections that were available that Shay's was probably the best of the bunch. I think the only other one that got close to it was probably Jeffries against Hartlepool. That was a really good finish. And also because it was his first senior goal. But no qualms about goal of the season winner?
No. Slim pickings, to be fair.
I actually changed my mind on the night when they put them up, and I decided that my favourite one was Mackenzie's at Sutton.
Was that just because we couldn't score a goal in the first half of the season? So anything
I think it's just that
thought was wonderful.
I think it's the fact he had to obviously shuffle the space to do it anyway. Obviously, he's in it weak side, isn't he? But yeah, like you say, that we didn't really score what you'd quantify as a worldie this season, would you? Really? I don't think even the winner. It's a good clean strike, but does it possibly take a deflection? I still don't know. Maybe. So who knows? But no, I wasn't going to be honest, put much argument regardless of whoever won that, even if it had been Williams, just for the moment.
I was going to say, I think there was goals where we had that were massive because of moments. Like, I missed it, unfortunately, but you boys were there. I don't think you was, Reece, but I know Jack was at Brentford that night back in November for the moment. And I think it was literally the only shot we had in the game. And the fact that Mika Mandron won a header in an opposing 6-yard box was reason enough to potentially stick that in. In terms of screamers, I can't remember, other than the only one that I can think that would have been, if it had actually gone in, was Adalukan at home to Barrow back in October, where he hit the top of the bar from about 35 yards. just the same crossbar that yours dipped in underneath, Reece, because we've not spoken about it for 2 minutes. That's the only one that I can think of that would have been remotely close to being a goal of the season.
I feel his pain at hitting the woodwork at Priestfield. But mine was a bit closer in than his. But
we don't. Yeah. I didn't even get the chance. Never mind.
Can't relate. Can't relate.
Next award was what was it? Academy Player of the Year. I must admit, I've not watched loads of academy football. I know they play at Beechings on a Saturday morning quite often. Probably should make more effort to go and have a look. There seems to be a decent enough young crop coming through at the moment. The likes of Matty MacArthur and Sam Gale have been doing very well locally to where I live. There's others, Freddie Carter as well. But it went to Joe Bode, which I only realised midway through the season was how you pronounced his name. For all the world, I thought it was Joe Gabode, but apparently not. It's a silent G. Again, you two might watch more of the youth football than I do, but he just stands out. I remember saying to him at the Player of the Year, "You're not 18 years old." He's an absolute. He's built like a super middleweight boxer. So yeah, he's probably a bit of a cheat code at that level of football.
I think, to be fair, he's the only one who really stepped up out of the academy lads this season, didn't he? He was forced into it a little bit because of how badly we were playing.
Yeah.
But no, from what I've been told as well, my understanding is I think 4 or 5 of the academy lads are going to be offered a pro contract as well. So there's quite an onus on getting players through and actually giving them a chance, which you have to probably argue we've not really done massively over the last few years. Like Matt Baker went to, ended up leaving to go to Stoke, didn't he? I'm not sure we wanted to keep him either, which was a bit of an odd one. And we've had lots of Max Kilman leave, who ended up playing for Wolves. So there's definitely some talent in there, and
Harvey Lintott can add on Harvey Lintott.
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely
just been promoted out of this division, having played nearly 30 games, I think. So
yeah, that was
we're not the only club that releases these youngsters and they go on and have good.
But I think we're in a position now as a club where we can take the chance on giving more of them a pro contract and not letting good talent slip through the net. I think that's where we are.
And I think this under 21/under 23 team will be absolutely key moving forward, won't it?
Definitely a good source of income at the end of the day. I've always said it: sell players, and if you get a lad, let's say Max Kilman, had actually come through at our club, or Matt Baker, we'd be making a couple of $100,000 off them potentially. I think we've ended up getting about 500 from Tucker, which is a steal when you think about it, given what's happened to them this season. But yeah, we need to bring more through. Partly for the rules, you need a couple of players, don't you, in the squad, but they're a good source of income. It's always good to see a young homegrown player come through as well.
And they're also low risk as well, aren't they, Reece? Because in terms of wages and contracts, it's not going to break the bank ever so slightly at all, is it? So it's a good route to be going down, and hopefully it's something that we can get in place for next season.
No, whereas Mayors maybe sort of 12 months ago, maybe that's why Lintott got released, because Harris knew that the budget was going to be so small, he needed to try and free up every single pound possible. And maybe if sort of the talks of us having a under 23 team, if that was in place last season, maybe players like Lintott would have stayed. But no, in terms of the young player, I suppose Bode, whatever you pronounce his name, is the only one. But it's quite funny that you say that you said to him at the presentation that he's definitely not 18. On the flip side, on the table behind me, I see Tom Nichols walking around the tables getting players to sign the shirts.
I know what you're going to say.
And at one, I turned around and I said to Owen, I said, "Why is Nichols getting some little boy to sign the shirt?" And 5 minutes later, I realised it was Josh Chambers.
He looks very young, doesn't he? Yeah, bless him.
Hopefully he's another one that obviously, albeit he's not made the impact with us this season, but Harris has spoke really well of his loan spell, which, to be fair, compared to a lot of the loans we send out, is at a decent level. I think if someone's performing really well in the National League South, they've got half a chance. So hopefully he's learnt from whatever happened a year ago.
He's out of contract though, isn't he? Harris confirmed he's out of contract on his press conference and after Salford. Oh no, it's different because it's a youth contract, but yeah, it'd be one I'd be inclined to get tied down to at least for another 12, 18 months for sure. Yeah,
just hopefully he's learned from, obviously, let's say a year ago, whether he just had the wrong heads in lots of the wrong voices in his head a year ago, or whether because there was apparently Tottenham took him for a trial, wouldn't they? Whether it's just the appeal of that.
Yeah,
I can imagine too much, but hopefully he settles down now.
We probably offered him a pittance as well, let's be honest. Going back to the point about Lintott, I don't blame him for moving on, to be honest, but I think the point is hopefully we can actually start to bring some players through of quality that don't end up leaving the club. That would be nice, because there's been so many of them over the years, and also not only that, getting players in from the local area that we've missed out on over the years. There's so many of them that you could list out. Smalling being one of them, is the obvious one. But I think we've got some good times ahead, hopefully, with the academy.
Yeah, I think it's another reason to be cautiously optimistic moving forward, isn't it? The big award on the evening, though, was first, second, and third, as usual. Sean Williams finished third. That was one I didn't quite see coming. I won't lie. I think he's been very good second half of the season, probably Leicester onwards. We've seen the real Sean Williams. Second was Alex McDonald. I think he's played the most games in a season since Christ knows how long. Something like 56 appearances or something ridiculous off the top of my head. But the winner, I think, was fairly cut and dried, wasn't it? It was the cat, the goat. The ageless Glenn Morris. I think it's 16 clean sheets this season, nearly 40, but as good as ever.
Well, I was sat next to Tim Dieng, who, by the way, was a great person to sit next to. I had a good laugh with him. But I said to him, I thought it'd be Ehmer, McDonald, Morris. That was my predicted top three in that order.
That was my three, yeah.
Not necessarily. I'm not an Ehmer hater, but I didn't necessarily. I can see why Williams finished third, because I think he does split the fan base a lot, Ehmer, and there's a lot of people, probably the same people that sit there and are too egotistical to say that Harris has had a good season. Probably with the same ones that didn't vote for Ehmer, to be honest. The one thing I'd say about Ehmer, which I think is probably undeniable, is he is miles better with a better partner with him. When he has to lead the centre-back line, he's not amazing. He's a bit of a shaky. He can be shaky. Whereas when you've got someone like Masterson, Zakwani, Egan next to him, he flourishes when he's the number two. Really,
yeah, I can see that. I think the anomaly was probably the season when he had Jack Tucker next to him all season, the first Evans season. I thought he was very good leading. But yeah, I think it's a consistent partner as well, isn't it? Having someone next to him all the time so you can get used to how that player plays. I think that's when he benefits more, Max. And yeah, like I said earlier, he's not flawless, because that's why he's playing League Two football at the end of the day. But we'll have a chat about Max a bit later on in the show. That was the end of season awards. We all had a good time afterwards. It went down into the factory, which was a bit different to the last time I'd been to one, because it stayed in the Great Hall, but I thought it worked really well. The manager, the players were all very amiable in terms of chatting and
Hess was brilliant. Hess was brilliant with me. Had a good chat. I won't say what he said to me in terms of some of the things, because I don't want to spoil things and probably give away secrets, but I think we're in for a decent summer, to be fair.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. I think we all heard things that you probably wouldn't have done if the manager or the players had not been slightly lubricated. But we'll just leave it as that for now.
Yeah. We're going to get told things again, basically, so I won't say nothing.
Let's talk about personal highlights for the season, because I think we have to, because if we go back 2 episodes, we wouldn't have envisaged any type of highlights from this season, apart from it ending, I'd imagine. In terms of games that you've been to, Reece, Jack, best limbs, best late-minute goals, last-minute goals, that type of thing. Can
Brentford
we do a top 3? Can you make a top 3? I know it was slim pickings first half of the season.
I'd say Sutton would probably be 3. Carlisle 2, Brentford 1. Probably would be my top 3 limbs.
That's fine, because obviously we didn't go to Brentford. I've got Sutton as well. Go on, Reece. What would yours be? I actually wrote 4 down. I've just realised that.
I'd say my number 1 was probably Colchester, because obviously it was still sort of very early days of the takeover, so there was still that initial sort of optimism about Brad and Shannon coming in. Our first away win of the season as well. I think obviously we'd had the Hartlepool game the week before, sort of that following that up with that win at Colchester. It was then that I did then decide we're going to be all right. I settled down a lot after that. That was a big moment, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a fair point, because we went away and I think we soaked up quite a bit of pressure, didn't we? We rode on like a bit at times, but that's what happens when you play away from home. But yeah, then we scored 2 really good goals, and I thought second half we managed it superbly.
Nichols' header didn't bet that day, unfortunately.
and the week after, but we'll come to that in a sec.
Yeah.
That week after was probably in my top 3 days, especially in terms of an away day. Swindon was unbelievably good. I know we ended up popping it up and drawing after being 3-1 in front, but I don't know whether it was because there were so many there and we were so optimistic after back-to-back wins from the takeover. Brad was quite close, wasn't he, in terms of where we were sat. We were very close to the home fans as well, which added to the atmosphere. And I think just to shut them up after they scored inside about 55 seconds or something ridiculous was a brilliant afternoon, and it was everything that a Gills travelling fan base is at its absolute best. So that was in my top three. I had Sutton. I've written down Sutton and Carlisle as well, last minute winners, which you can't beat regardless of level competition. A weird one for me that I've actually written down was last minute winner against Dagenham. I know I was only one of about 35 people in attendance. The pitch was freezing cold. I had my daughter with me. She was under about 3 blankets. It was that chilly that night. It's probably the best we saw of Hagi Badelakun as well. It was a really good goal on the break. I think we defended a corner, didn't we? And then he broke and played a 1-2 with Scott Cashkett and bashed it past their keeper. And it set up that tie with Leicester, which added to the romance as well. But if I've got to take one out, I'd probably get rid of that, and I'd say Sutton at home, Swindon away, and Carlisle at home. In terms of
Sutton at home, I didn't go to Sutton at home. I think for me, I was talking about Sutton away, just because it just limbs on the terrace, brilliant. I think with Carlisle, I'd probably throw out there, if you think of home game limbs. Obviously, you said Sutton there. I struggle to think of a game. I didn't go to Bristol Rovers at home when Cody scored a couple at the end to keep us up. But I went to the Morecambe one when Burton scored in the last minute in 12-13. There's very few times when you're at a home game where there's proper limbs, no matter where you are in the stadium. And Carlisle was one of those. It's one of those, the only ones I can think of in recent memory where we went as mad as you would at an away goal.
I can remember Leighton Orient at home. I think 14-15, Taylor was still in charge. I think we were down to 10 men. Michael Doughty had been sent off.
Cody scored an overhead kick, did he?
Got like a sort of scissor kick from a Brennan Dickinson corner in the last minute of injury time. I think Leon Leggard scored that day as well and didn't know what to do. Like sort of stood in the 6-yard box and got, I've scored. Where do I run? Yeah, I think I broke a seat that day.
Nice. They are rare though, aren't they? Home limbs,
and that comes from all-seater stadiums and a lack of terracing now, unfortunately, doesn't it? Yeah.
Brentford was great. 2,000 fans there. I said before, it shows the potential of the club. All the lads at the back kind of penned in together, and everyone went mental, didn't they? When that, well, you good lads went there, but everyone went mental when that went in. That was
I did a knee slide across my apartment in Edinburgh. Yeah, that was mental on my own. I think I woke the neighbours up.
So I guess it's somewhat meaningless in the long, in the grand scheme of things, because it's a cup game, but you don't think that at the time, but against a Premier League team. So that for me is probably.
Oh, certainly not the season we were having as well.
Yeah,
made it even better. Yeah,
very true.
I don't think we did loads of away days. I certainly wasn't that keen during the first half of the campaign, just because we were that rubbish. But I've written down Colchester and Swindon were probably my 2 favourite away. I only did 5, so it's a limited choice. But Colchester for the reasons Reece said, and Swindon just because of the whole atmosphere that day was absolutely spot on.
I think probably Brentford for me, mate. I'm looking back. I went to new grounds. Carlisle we lost. Newport we lost. Stockport we drew 0-0. Harrogate we drew 0-0. I don't think I saw an away win. The away wins were.
I don't think you've seen an away goal in them aside from Brentford, have you either?
No, I haven't. No. What are the away wins? Colchester? I wasn't there.
Colchester, Rochdale, and Salford.
Yeah, I haven't seen an away win this season. That's not unusual as a Gillingham fan, is it? Let's be honest.
No, it's not. It's not that new, but yeah, it was even more slim pickings than normal. Reece, in terms, I know you didn't do a great deal either. You can probably say a Barcelona game or something.
Oh yeah. No, I did. What did I do? I did obviously Wimbledon first game. We won't talk about that. I didn't do another one until Colchester after that. Then I did Swindon and Walsall. We won't talk about that one either. But I think in terms of the top threes, I'd probably say Colchester's 1, Carlisle at home 2, and weirdly I'd say Orient at home 3. 1 because we beat top of the league, and 2 because it was one of them sort of that I'll look back in time was like, what a weird evening that was. I was there as the lights went out and we finished the game at walking pace like we played in Sunday, to be fair.
Well, you might have done. I didn't. I had about 87,000 centre-back partners.
I think if you put football games aside, my personal highlight is probably the fact that since the first time since 2004-5, I've got a season ticket again and I've renewed it. So and I actually got some decent.
And that's brilliant.
Seats.
And again, that's the Gallington effect, and that's what we want, isn't it? And I've written down as well, Leicester City at home, we had our club back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, we move on to stuff looking forward now. Season tickets came out. Mixed reaction from the fan base. I must admit that I wasn't overly happy. when
No.
it first came out. I have renewed. I was always going to renew, but you know, it's good to have a moan from time to time, or an opinion, just in case certain people are watching. Now, what did we think when the season tickets first come out? Because in fairness, the price isn't a disaster, is it? But I just think the lack of early bird and that
Oh,
type of thing was a little bit of a kick
yeah.
in the guts to existing season ticket holders that have had one for multiple seasons year on year.
I had a whinge. For me, I felt it was the one faux pas of Fisher's reign the entire time. The only one thing he did wrong, in my opinion, was say that it was going to be cheaper than last season. It technically was on the early bird, but it's a bit of a technicality.
That was the thing that frustrated me. They was correct on a technicality, and it was a bit. It was almost like small print that you never read, and that's what caught us all out, which was a bit frustrating.
And I think for me, I think I said it on the last episode that a lot of people in the end have actually ended up, renewing and people have got a fresh season ticket that they've not had for years. But I think we've missed a little bit of a trick personally in so much, and I don't know financially whether it's possible for us to do this. Probably would have been more so than ever before under Scally, because he needed the money that we put into the club.
Mhm.
I felt we could have done, not even if it was as extreme as Bradford, but something similar where we got people through the door. I've got a mate who took his kid, his 12-year-old, consistently to games at the second half of last season, and he said to me, if it's relatively cheap, I'll buy one, and if the under 14s are still free, I'll buy one. They're not as cheap as they were. And the under 14s you now have to pay for. But I genuinely thought we'd do a sliding scale type scenario where we pay a reasonable amount, say 350, and the more people that renew, it slides down and ends up filling the stadium. I genuinely thought with the crest of the wave and the good vibes around the club that they'd have come up with something like that. And it just felt that they were still being it's a business. It needs to be profitable, and we need money to spend to meet FFP. But I really did think we'd do something, so I was disappointed. I've got over that, but I was disappointed at the time.
Yeah, and the under 14 thing is applies to me and my Ava as well, because I've taken her to, she must have done 20, 25 games this season, including away days, and they're not cheap, regardless of whether it's a kid's ticket or anything like that. And kudos to Walsall, actually, while we're talking about it. They did a family ticket, which I thought was really good. And usually to get a family ticket, it's 2 adults, 2 kids or something like that. But they did 1 adult and 1 child, and it cost me an extra £2 on top of my match ticket, which I thought was brilliant. Off on a tangent slightly, but the under 14 thing being I think it's free, but you have to sit in one part of the Medway stand. But I don't want to do that. She likes it in the Rainham end. She knows the boundaries. She knows if she hears language that she ignores it. She knows if she hears Dad say language, she hits him. So it works well. But I just thought it was a bit frustrating that, you can have a free ticket for your kid, but you've got to sit where we tell you. I just thought, just make it free to everyone where they want to sit. You're getting the next generation of fans in. Reece, I come to you, because me and Jack have pretty much taken over that segment.
No, I agree with Jack that I think obviously once the takeover happened and we had the Crawley initiative, which we knew was a one-off anyway, because it was never going to be a moneymaker for the club. But I think there was just the expectation that we was going to be quirky, we was going to do something different to the norm. So I think sort of the reaction was they come out and it was sort of like, is that it? Kind of thing. And I was disappointed about the lack of an early bird. I thought it didn't show an awful lot of loyalty to those that already had season tickets. And ultimately, it wasn't giving anyone an incentive to renew early. But I suppose on the flip side, the club would argue that the fact they've now installed the instalment option maybe counteracts that point. So in the end, it was one of them that at the time I was like, I'm not particularly happy about this. The price increase, I get. Everything in life at the moment is going up in price. It was the lack of the early bird and stuff that I was a bit unsure on, but within a couple of days I sort of looked at it a bit more and thought I understand it, but I was always going to renew this season anyway.
I think for the likes of us, we were always going to renew. And we was always going to be slightly annoyed about it and renew. My issue is the likes of my mate, who we could have got through the door and into the stadium, spending money, and the next generation of fan, his boy, coming every game. That's my frustration. I think the kind of casual fan could have become a season ticket holder, and we've missed out on that. But we've missed out on that for years, so it's nothing new. I just felt with the way the club, or the feeling around the club, with Fisher in charge of operations, I just felt they'd get it. And it's the first time I sat back and went, they may have made a boo-boo here. It's the only time actually they've done that, I think.
Yeah, and in fairness, it's not a major one. It's just
No.
like you say, the technicality of the wording of what Fish said at the first or the second Q&A was the thing that sort of, like I said, felt like a bit of a kick in the guts. But yes, I think us and plenty of others were always going to go and get a season ticket anyway, so no real harm done. And let's be honest, if we're having this chat in a year's time and we've got promoted to League One, we're not going to care, are we? So
no, definitely not.
New kits are due out fairly soon. There is a little bit of mystery around one of them. I think the general consensus and belief is that the home kit, is going to be fairly traditional. I'm personally hoping for blue shirts, white socks, and white shorts.
Yeah, that is Gillingham, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I know we've got blue, we've got a bit of black in mine, and we didn't coordinate this, by the way. We all randomly turned up with these shirts on, but the for me, a Gillingham shirt really is blue and white, to be honest. And I think an away shirt, in my opinion, should be yellow. Hate us in red, and I think a third kit should be what you've got on, mate, black and white. I think that's personally our colours. So hopefully they are that. But if it is red, so be it. I don't know.
I think there's talk around the third shirt being a completely out there colour. I think it's going to be something that we're not expecting at all. Like whether it's going to be something weird like the pink that we did a few years ago. I'm not saying it's going to be pink, but that seems to be the vibe I'm getting from people, like talking to Brad and Shannon at the Q&A and Fisher's comments as well, that the third shirt's just going to be something that's completely left field. What are we thinking?
Red, white, and blue for America.
Let's. Are we going full like sort of Hulk Hogan type stuff? Like it's like Gillamania or something like that. And like if we score, we've all got to rip them off in front of the rain. I mean, that'd be a sight, wouldn't it? God, dearie me. Oh, Cole, let's pick a colour. What are we thinking?
Gold.
What, real gold?
No, gold because they think we're going to win the league and take the gold medal.
Then we couldn't have a yellow then, could we really?
No.
So it'd rule out the yellow, wouldn't it? Yeah, so white away kit, you think?
Yeah, probably.
I reckon we're going to go... Yeah, I think we'll go yellow away. I've just got a feeling they might decide that with a third kit, they're going to make it something that's going to appeal to the youngsters to try and sell shirts, which, just be honest, for a club like Gillingham, all the third shirt is a money maker in exercise, let's be honest.
Yeah, because we'll probably only wear it about once or twice, like the anniversary shirt of this that we had about 4 years ago. The only thing I could think of wasn't there some sort of weird quartered shirt in the early 80s that we wore a couple of times, was like red and white quarters, was made by Adidas. Have I seen that on a Gills shirt collection?
Never seen that before. I'm
sure Darren Pont has put something on the shirt collecting page on Facebook. I'm just wondering if it's going to be something a bit weird like that.
We'll end up buying them in the end, won't we?
Oh, absolutely. I definitely will, because that's what I do. Hopefully we'll find out for sure in the next couple of weeks, because I'm hoping it's going to be by the end of May and we're going to have them in plenty of time for the new season, unlike the last 20 years, it feels like, where we've got them around Christmas time.
Yeah. Again, the little things like that always wound me up. Little things where you think so tin pot, and it's another example, hopefully, of us getting our acting gear, including season tickets, for instance, as well. I know at times we have had offers out early doors, but last season I remember the club tweeting this time last year saying they hadn't even decided what they were going to do about.
I don't think they went on sale till like end of June or something, did they? Ridiculous.
Crazy. We were the architects of our own downfall towards the end of Scally's reign, really, weren't we?
Well, we were when you go back to the kits, and he was blaming Macron. Yeah, every other club in the country had them in their club shop like a month before, and we were still going, "Oh no, it's because of COVID." It's just like, we're not stupid.
Easy excuse,
don't treat us like idiots. We can see what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
Right. Contracts. Next section. Plenty have been renewed, which is very un-Gillingham. Usually we're sitting here about this time of year waiting for a retained list and thinking, right, we've got to sign 12, 15 players. I don't think it'll be that many this year. Glenn Morris has signed a new deal. Shea Alexander has activated a new deal based on appearances, which I'm absolutely over the moon with. I think he's been one of our most improved players. Max Ehmer, Sean Williams, Robbie McKenzie have also renewed for 23-24. Talks are ongoing between the club and David Titonda and Alex McDonald. I've written down discuss. So, Reece, I will come to you first. Thoughts on contract situations so far in terms of those that have put their name to the dotted line and the two that we're still talking to?
first of all, I'm not overly surprised by any of the decisions that have been made. The one I probably disagree on, I wouldn't have offered to Ton the one personally. But that's about it. Obviously, what he's still to do remains to be seen. I just think there is a consistent. He's great fun to watch. Don't get me wrong, because you never know what you're going to get out of him. But I just think for where we want to be next season, I just think he lacks that consistency. And obviously, wait and see with Maka as well. It all depends on what the sticking point is with Maka. If it is contract length, I'm with the club. I don't think he's worth more than a year, to be honest. But if it is the fact that he's happy with 1 year and it's a money issue, then I'd like to think we can try and iron that out, because he has been good for us this season, and it does make a nice change for us to which is weird. We probably didn't think we'd be saying this after the first half of the season, when I think we was all saying we wanted shot of the entire lot. But too many times in recent years we've sat here at the end of the season and gone, well, it's not ideal. We've got to try and sign a whole new team again. 2 weeks before this season started, we did one of these episodes and we had 13 players.
Yep.
Maybe that's why we started the season so badly. So it's good that we have got that nucleus there that we've seen from the second half of this season is already good enough to compete sort of top 6, top 7 in this division. And it just means we've got less work to do over the summer. So yeah, I'm quite comfortable with the situation, to be fair. And we've kept good experience and also I can see why we've offered people like McDonald contracts, because we know what he can do here. We could let McDonald go. We could try and sign someone else that we think could do the same job. They don't settle and they don't. So there is that side as well, that also keeping players that we know exactly what they can offer us here now. I can see the benefit to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. The only one I would disagree slightly on is I'm not against David Tatonda staying. I think he'll benefit from competition, and I've always been of the opinion that we need 2 people per position. I'm not a fan of, and I get we have to do it at this level, but we're in a situation now where we can potentially go and get 2 per position because we're more flush in terms of finances. So
he'd be signing on as a second choice left back, wouldn't he? Let's be honest.
We've also then got to think about Lewis Page. Do we offer him a contract? Because from what I've seen of him, I think he looks all right. But the issue has always been fitness over the last few years for Lewis Page. So that's something else to think about. But he was very sort of vague, wasn't he, Neil Harris, when it was mentioned in that interview with Phil Catterick after the Salford game. But in terms of the people that have already signed on, Jack, I think we're all on the same page. I think they're all very good renewals.
I think we all kind of said, well, I think me and Reece said wouldn't have been gutted to see Mackenzie go. But I'm glad he's stayed. Everyone else makes sense and probably the right decision. I think McDonald, he's one of those players that's very well liked by the club. He's got great work ethic, can whip a dead ball in and create a chance. We'll struggle a lot to find someone who will replace that. And he's been a vital reason as to why we've done so well this second half of the season. So as long as we can find someone like him, then yeah, if he has to go, he has to go. But I think he'd be a big miss. And to Reece's point about most of the squad being settled and that having a positive effect, I completely agree. Because I mean, if you look, for instance, at the 2012-13 season, the nucleus of that squad was already in place. We added Barrett, Weston, Burton, people like that, some good quality players, Nelson, but a lot of that squad was already in place. So I think it bodes well when you've got a good quality nucleus, and there's a lot of experience in there as well, which is probably going to be quite key.
Yeah, because I've got an app that I use, and I've taken out the people that are leaving, because it's been mentioned. I think I've taken out Scott Cashkit as well, because I think Neil Harris has genuinely forgot that he actually plays for us. And I've taken out David Tatonda and Alex McDonald as well, on the premise that obviously they've not signed. So I'm working it out. We've got Glenn Morris, Shay Alexander, Will Wright, Maxima, Sean Williams, Mackenzie, Jeffries, Clark. I'd class as the first team group from what I've seen.
Yeah.
Coleman, Walker, Nichols, Turner, Hawkins, Dieng, and Lapsley, and I've got Bode in there as well. That gives us 16.
Very good squad.
I thought Neil Harris said he could only find 13, but obviously he's being asked. He's having a microphone shoved under his nose straight after a game, so to speak. So I don't think we're a million miles away. Before I ask you two in terms of what you think we need, I want to talk about 2 individuals in a little bit more detail. One will be Max Ehmer, based on the landmark that he hit earlier in the season. But one is for a player that is going to be leaving. Neil Harris has confirmed that, who I think deserves a mention because he was very, very good. Certainly the first 2 seasons under Steve Evans. That's Stuart O'Keefe, who's been club captain for the last 3 or 4 years, on and off. I'm trying to think. He was still club captain even when Carl Dempsey was captain on the pitch, wasn't he? 131 games for Stuart O'Keefe, 6 goals in his 4 years with us, about 2 million yellow cards.
Looks like Dom Jeffries.
Definitely is Dom Jeffries' dad or uncle at least. And it's the only reason I'm glad Stuart O'Keefe is leaving, is because then I won't get the two muddled up like I did for the first half of the campaign.
Yeah.
I've written down very much a Steve Evans type player. Remind me a little bit of someone like Dave Martin back in the mid-90s.
Yeah,
He was there just to sit in front and just kick people, essentially, and then let better players go and play. 1920, when the season got cut short, and 2021, when he came back from a broken leg, I thought he was absolutely brilliant. He was epitomised everything that we are as a football club. Dare I say it, and I might upset people, he epitomised everything that a Steve Evans team is. But he has them types of players in there. 2 10th place finishes in the division above we're currently in. Proper leader, played the game on the edge. For whatever reason, I think something's gone from that game this season, whether that's his legs, I'm not sure. But a very, very good player for us for the main part, and generally a very good free transfer.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm gutted he's leaving, if I'm honest.
No, I think it's time. I think it's time to move on. I absolutely get that. I'm not sitting here and saying I think he should be offered a new contract. I think the likes of Ethan Coleman, Tim Dieng, Sean Williams are in front of him.
They're ahead of him, yeah.
Sign.
I think the one thing I'd say about Stuart O'Keefe, put aside the seasons before, this season, I'm a bit precious about managers and players coming over to club fans when you've gone to away games like Carlisle and Newport, where there were train strikes or cancelled trains. Mm-hmm. And he's the only one consistently that came over in that first half of the season and actually clapped the fans after every single game. And he was the first one to front it. So if you take anything else out of the equation, the guy's got some balls that he actually come over and appreciated the fans, despite what he knew what was going on in terms of how bad we were performing. So if nothing else, he deserves credit for that.
Oh, I totally agree. And yeah, but I'll come to you now, Reece. I think he deserves credit for a lot more than just that as well, because he was a big part of that team that certainly flirted with the playoffs in League One a couple of times.
Yeah, I won't say a bad word about Stuart. Clearly, performance has dipped this season, but he was also playing in a very poor team in that first half of the season. Obviously, he wasn't given the luxury like some of the others of being involved in it in the second half of the season. But I also think he just seemed to pick up a lot of niggles in the first half of the season, which perhaps with age as well, just taking their toll on him. And it is the right time to cut ties. But yeah, a really good leader, a fighter. Gave his everything every time he pulled the shirt on, which, you know, for a club like us as fans, if someone does that, even if they lack a little bit of technical ability, you'll give them a pass for it, because it's the minimum we ask for. Mm-hmm. So no, I think he'll do a job for a National League team. I'm sure he'll get himself a club nice in it.
Like
I wish him nothing but the best.
Absolutely. Yeah, I said the same thing to McDonald, by the way, at the Player of the Year deal. I said, look, you're technically a good player, but you've given your all for us. And if you end up leaving, mate, you'll go with our well wishes, because, you know, that's all you can ask. So that they do get the pass, don't they? Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. They're Gillingham type players at the end of the day. Gillingham 100%. Don't have the best players generally. We have the odd one that comes through and is the anomaly, or the exception to the rule. But generally, what our teams are about is solidarity, togetherness, and working bloody hard. And Alex McDonald and Stuart O'Keefe both certainly fall into that category.
Which is why it's great to have Hess as the director of football as well, by the way. Mm-hmm. Head of recruitment, because I think he embodies that, and he will bring players in that mould.
Yes, I think so. And I mean, you can only look at the players that they've already done in such a short space of time. And we saw the reaction from Leyton Orient fans after Ethan Coleman arrived. And I think you sort of look at them reactions now and you think, who were they watching? Because he's been absolutely immaculate in the times that we've seen him so far. And he's rangy and he's big. Reminds me of a racehorse. He's got such a huge stride. Yeah. And I think he'll only develop with the likes of Sean Williams and Tim Dieng sort of nurturing him through pre-season and beyond.
I agree. I think it'll do well if we play the ball on the ground a bit more, though.
Let's move on to Maxima. We've already mentioned him a couple of times. He's come up naturally in conversation, but for me, you don't play 350 plus games for one club without having some ability. And we can all sit here on Twitter and we can say what we think and give our opinions. But the fact is that he's played regularly for the likes of Peter Taylor, Justin Edinburgh, Adrian Pennock, Steve Lovell, Steve Evans, and now Neil Harris. He had a year on loan at Bristol Rovers, we know that, but he came back home. Like I've said, I'm a big fan, so I'm not going to sit here and take this part. I will let you two take the floor for this one. Reece, if he plays, I think, 25 games next season, he goes into the top 10, which is an absolutely phenomenal achievement considering the amount of players that we've had over our 130-year history. I think the next sort of one of the modern era that he's chasing down, I think in 10th is Nicky Southall. How fitting would it be for Max Ehmer, because he has had a lot of stick, but we have to remember that he's played in some good Gillingham sides over the last 9 years as well, to potentially get to 400 games next season and add a promotion to his CV?
Yeah, it'd be great for him, be great for us, because it means obviously we've been successful. As you say, he's had plenty of criticism over the years, none more so than from me. I've been a big critic at times. But so perhaps then it says a lot that, one, I agreed with his contract extension, and two, I had him at second in my Player of the Year votes. Listen, any player that makes 350 appearances for a club in this modern era of football deserves a lot of recognition, because it's rare. Yeah, we probably won't see it happen too many more times in our lifetime, such as the way the game is now. And your point spot on, Matt, that I've got down here is that despite the fact that me watching from the terraces have had doubts at times, when numerous different managers rely on a player, I think that says a lot more about them than what we can see from the terraces. Clearly, a lot of he must have good qualities in the dressing room, because he's been a regular. Let's be honest, he's never really. What do you say? He's been in 9 years. He's, other than I can think of, the start of that season, we was really good under Edinburgh. Egan and Oshalaja started the season, but apart from a little period then, he's generally not sat on the bench here at all. He's always played. He's always been relied on.
Doesn't miss games because of injury. Very rarely
No,
suspended as well.
No,
very true.
And like Jack touched on earlier, I think he benefits a lot from having not just a good partner ability-wise, but also consistency, someone that he knows is going to be with him week in, week out, that he can build up that trust with. And once he does that, he does look generally a competent enough defender. Like I say, he's made a couple of mistakes this season, but who hasn't? Even Masterson in the Newport game gave a goal away from a set piece. It doesn't mean I don't want him to play next season. It's just the nature of where we are. So no,
it comes back to your point about managers, doesn't it? They have bad spells. It doesn't make them bad defenders.
Yeah, but no, what I could say for Max is that he's done a U-turn on my opinion of him over the last year or so, and that's credit to him.
I think he divides opinion a lot. So therefore, I don't think people would have been devastated if he hadn't been offered a new contract. And I think the fact he left for Bristol Rovers, albeit for personal reasons, family reasons, I think that probably does stick in the throat a little bit with some people. The fact,
but wasn't that due to the fact that we weren't offering contracts? Scully literally wasn't offering contracts because of COVID.
That is true. And he said he wanted to move nearer to West London, didn't he? Which I think is where he's from. So I get that. But he's probably, out of the top 20 players in this club, appearance makers, he's probably the most disrespected of the lot, which is, we could debate the point as to why. But ultimately, he's been a good, I don't think he's been an excellent defender for the club. He's been a good, steady one. And I think that's what he'll be. And it'll be interesting next season if we do sign Masterson and another centre-back. Be interesting with the clout we've got financially, whether he does actually start next season. But even if he doesn't, it'll be a very good squad player at the very, very least.
Right. That moves us on to the last section of the evening. What do we need? I've done it based on Alex McDonald and David Tatonda not signing. So I've written down 2 centre-backs, hopefully 1 Connor Masterson.
Yep.
You're both nodding. That's a good start.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've said.
2 left-backs. Could Lewis Page be 1? I've written in brackets.
Pretty much exactly what I've said.
3 wingers with pace.
I'd said 2. Yeah, I'd said 2. But if we can sign 3, great.
I'd have said 2 without Macca, because I think Neil Harris or it might have been Hesse said 7. at the Player of the Year do.
Mm.
But obviously, if Maka doesn't sign, then we probably need an extra one. So that's why I went 3 wingers. And I've put pacey frontman as well.
Pace, yeah. I think a creative midfielder would be good as well. I think there's a possibility Turner might leave. I don't know if he'll want to be number 2, so maybe another keeper.
That was there was that conversation that Harris had again, going back to the Salford press conference afterwards, and he was like, Jake deserves to play. We'll look at it in the summer. I know he's under contract, but yeah, it would be interesting if there was an offer that came in for Jake. I imagine then we'd probably go down the route of a youngster who comes in as backup to Glenn Morris.
I think if you look at the players that are leaving, O'Keefe, potentially Reeves, obviously Lee's gone, McDonald potentially. We could do with a couple more creative midfielders, but ultimately the thing that's the thing that would take us to the next level, in my opinion, that would win us away games, is being able to get higher up the pitch and counter attack teams and have pace in the team. So I think pace in the team would be good. And I think the thing that you can see in some games is Hawkins is excellent in the air. Nichols is a great sort of burrower. He's a good second striker. He links play well, but we need someone who's an out and out goal scorer, like the guy that was at Chesterfield that went Peterborough, for instance. Someone of that ilk that's going to bang goals in. That's going to be the difference, I think, for us next season. Someone like an Alfie May, maybe even someone with a better strike record than that. And I think if we had,
if you believe social media today,
yeah, well, he's from Dartford though, and he wants to come back to Kent. But I think if we sign that nucleus of what we feel we need, I think playoffs minimum is where we end up, and playoffs is minimum of where we're going to hold expectations against Harris, and is ultimately, if we do another one of these, whenever it may be, say in January, and we're reviewing this part of the season, I think if we're anything below 10th, he's in trouble.
Or gone.
Maybe. I think his man management and his likability amongst staff, I think, is what's kept him in his job, and I think is what will carry him quite a lot of favour. I think that, again, just going back to what my cousin said, the Millwall fan, I think he knows some people that know him, and they've always said that he tactically maybe not amazing, doesn't always have a plan B, plays in the air a lot, but bloody good man manager, and people want to play for him. And I think that's probably shown this season in the second half of the season.
Yep, that sums it up. Reece, I've mentioned it, Jack's mentioned it. Is pace going to be key for next season? If we can get that into the right areas, particularly at the top end of the pitch. I've said it for weeks now. Yeah. I don't think we lose at Barrow. I don't think we lose at Northampton if we've got someone that plays wide that can run it into a corner and hold it up. We had Tristan Abrahams, but he didn't get used for one reason or another. Seemed like a bit of a sort of a knee-jerk signing because of the injuries to Scott Cashkit and Lewis Walker, unfortunately. I'm not saying that Tristan Abrahams is a bad player, but we just never got to see the best of him. I just think if we'd had 2 out-and-out wingers that could run the ball up the pitch, we'd probably get points in both of them games. Dare I say it, we might have seen out the game against Stockport as well.
Yeah, maybe it's looking at it, it's not a massive surprise why our home form was so good in comparison to the away form. Because, and don't get me wrong, our strategy in January was spot on. We had to address the spine of the team. We did that obviously with Masterson, Dieng, 2 strikers, because we signed 11 players in January. But in terms of week in, week out starters, it's only really been them 4. Obviously, Lapsley was on the bench for a lot of it. O'Brien's been on the bench a lot. Coleman's been on the bench a lot. So yeah, the spine of the team we had to address in January, and it was wait till the summer to do the pieces around it. And I think especially away from home, you naturally, when you play away from home, you have to play on the break more. To play on the break, it's a bit hard to do that if you've not got any pace in the team. So I think we have suffered from that at times. But when I spoke to Harris at the Player of the Year Awards, he also suggested to me that there isn't actually a lot of pace in this division throughout anyway. So he didn't say he doesn't want it, but he said he doesn't think it's necessarily the be all and end all.
Okay.
I agree with Jack, possibly another creative midfielder.
Depends how we play, doesn't it? Because we got if we play at 10.
We've got Lapsley, but you look at I know they said about maybe giving him a new contract or not, but Reeves, someone like a Reeves, someone who's quite nippy, low centre of gravity, can play a nice ball, can whip a goal in every now and again. Someone like him, which is probably McDonald's in that mould a little bit, but obviously plays on the wing. But someone like that, for me, someone who can unlock a defence, would be good. And it's an interesting one. We play with a diamond, so whether we actually end up signing wingers is another thing altogether, because it might not change his system. But for me, that's why we've done poorly first half of the season. lack of pace and many other reasons, but it's also why we've not won many away games. In my opinion, I agree with what Reece says in terms of away games.
Yeah, I agree. And I did mention his name to Harris, and he didn't give me much of a response. But I sort of, whether you class him as creative midfielder or not, I don't know. But I think if we wanted him, Thompson's very gettable this summer. He's hardly kicked a ball at Peterborough all season. We know that Harris has got Paul. I think if Masterson's here next season, I think Neil Harris is a massive part of that.
Yeah,
and I think if we could convince Peterborough with a little bit of money to part with him, I wouldn't be surprised if he was back next season, to be honest.
Like Ben Thompson, he can almost do both sides, can't he? We saw that in the latter part of last campaign when we got relegated. He's almost like probably like almost Dom Jeffries, but just further along in his footballing journey at the moment. And that'd be another interesting one, because if we sign wingers, Dom Jeffries can play in the middle. So then we've got another player that can get us up the pitch in central areas as well. So it all starts to then fit into place. I think we've covered it all, gents. We've been going an hour and a half. It's absolutely flown by. 90
hopefully
minutes.
we've still got people watching this.
90 minutes that certainly went quicker than the first half of the season. In fact, if we wouldn't have got to 90 minutes first half of the season, we'd have all walked out after 75. I'm going to end on a slightly sad note, but it's another person that does need mention, and that's Tony Smith, who passed away recently, former Gills director, who pumped a lot of his own money into the club just to keep us afloat in the early 90s before Paul Scally came in and bought the football club. I think it's fair to say that Paul Scally did plenty right for this football club in the early part of his reign at the very least, but if it wasn't for Tony Smith, we'd never have known who Paul Scally was.
100%.
So, love and best wishes to Tony Smith's wife and family and everyone else who knew him, because he is a very big part of the history and the tapestry of this great football club that we love so dear. So to close tonight's episode, rest in peace, Tony Smith, and up the Gills.